Good evening, everyone. Call the Historic Preservation Commission.
Your mic on?
Probably not.
Okay.
And I have such a loud voice. Unfortunately, we don't have a chair, so I'm vice chair. But Zach, if you would do native land acknowledgement and a roll call for us.
Present.
I'm here.
Zach, she said she can't hear you online. Is everyone? Sometimes I won't.
Commissioner Williams. Okay, we'll come. All right. Commissioner Lamp,
Here.
Commissioner Melcher, Commissioner Robinson.
I'm here.
Thank you.
All right, get call for audience. Anybody registered to talk? Uh-oh, we got one sliding in. Consideration of minutes. Wow, we have met since April 9th, 2025. Rob, what do you want to talk on?
Sorry, 9A.
9A, okay. 9A is going to be 9B before this is done.
Okay.
Consideration of minutes. Commissioners, any corrections, additions to the minutes of April 9th, 2025? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion.
I motion to approve.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Now the good one, selection of chair. I think by unanimous decision, we've already decided that Mariah is going to be the new chair, but need to do a formal. Are there any self-nominations for chair? Hearing none, I'll call for a recommendation for chair.
I recommend Commissioner Justice.
Any additional? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Good job, Chair. slide on over.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Before I turn it over to you, I am gonna shuffle the agenda just a little bit. We're gonna replace 9B with 9A and 9A with 9B. Simply because got people from Tucson and they need to get home at the end of this, so it doesn't need to get a 9 o'clock start on that, so. 6, 7, and 8, there seems to be no agenda items. Update presentations. Then makes the downtown Tempe Historic Core Plan first up. Corky, you gonna start this off? I think all three of them. Corky, John, and Jennifer, if you'd formally introduce yourselves and your subject, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly.
We've had a slight change to the makeup there, but they'll introduce themselves.
I'm not John, but I can play him on TV if needed.
That works.
My name is Mark Delatorre. I am the Director of Denver Operations for MIG. We're a national planning and design
You're
firm.
his boss.
Yeah. National planning and design firm who focuses in downtown spaces around the country. We're really fortunate to be joined by two excellent colleagues here, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Jennifer Levstick. I'm with Westland Resources, and I will be helping as a historic preservation specialist on this project.
Good evening. I'm Corky Poster. I'm an architect and planner and a principal and founder of Poster Myrtle McDonald. We specialize in a variety of things, but most particularly historic preservation, affordable housing, and community development. And we're done several projects with MIG. We're excited to be here.
We have a relatively brief presentation for y'all tonight. The focus of it really is getting towards the discussion, though, and understanding from y'all's perspective what this plan needs to do, what some aspirations are, what concerns are, and make sure that we hear from y'all as we embark on the front end of this plan effort together. Do we have the clicker, or am I kind of signaling? Gesture? All right. Is that gesture? Yeah. Agenda tonight, introductions, check. You know who we are. A few more things to go through. We're going to talk about our approach to the overall plan process, give you a brief summary of where we're at. Some of that's coming off of our initial site tour, which we had a few weeks back. Started off at 7 in the morning, 95 degrees, got a little hotter, but we did a great job. We covered all of the downtown core and a lot of the historic properties and a lot of great valuable information on that initial site tour. Then from there, we're starting to distill down some of what the plan goals are going to be as a starting point, and then we'll move into the discussion after that. From the overall approach, no, it's good. That's good cadence. You're following me. Yeah, we got this. So on the next slide, talking about our approach to the project itself, this is from our proposal to the competitive RFP process. It starts first and foremost with the considerations and promotion of preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration, thinking of all the historic assets in the downtown core. And we know that support of and guidance around historic preservation doesn't start with this plan effort, that we're building on a lot of great planning principles and foundations, first and foremost being Tempe Tomorrow, which the latest iteration of that was adopted a couple of years back. As we think about the balance of historic preservation with what y'all are experiencing today, there's a lot of development pressure. We want to think about what those other regulatory and financial tools and incentives are to balance the need for change and growth over time. So transfer of development rights and density is one consideration in there that we'll be exploring throughout this process. We know that the historic assets themselves are part of that, but the role that the downtown core has with larger regional assets being the Butte is an important consideration when we think about the role of the downtown core and the larger Tempe community. Throughout the process, we involved with Development Review Board, the Historic Preservation Commission, and next slide, working closely with a lot of other great partners, the History Museum, the local Native Nations, and obviously SHPO is part of that overall process. As I mentioned, the downtown core itself, we want to think about not just the assets, but what the role of it is in the larger community, and that's as an educational resource, and that's thinking through some of the considerations in adaptive reuse, such as new innovative uses that bring those buildings forward in time, so that the downtown really is this kind of cultural nexus and this core of a really important place within the larger community. And the last part that it seems a little kind of additive on the other, but the role of public art in that as an expression in the public realm as we think about history and modernity is an important part of that consideration. And one of our public art specialists at MIG will be heavily involved as we move into.
And last night we at the Development Review Commission, we were reminded that the pedestrian environment and public open space is an important part of what we're doing. So
Yeah.
it didn't make the list, but it's made the list in our head.
Yeah, certainly. Well said, Corky.
Before you go on to that, I just wanted to be clear that our presence here is really to hear from you. We are at the very, very beginning of this process, so we don't have a lot of detail or findings to present to you, but we do want guidance. We want some direction as to what concerns and what issues you think are important for us to pay attention to as we move forward.
Corky was my professor 20 years back, and it reminds me of it in presentations sometimes. But actually, a good segue to the next section here. There's 3 major phases to the project. This first part is really getting up and oriented. We've been on an initial site tour. We're starting our first conversations as we work with staff kind of behind the scenes, and are starting our initial document and existing conditions review. The major phase of it really moving from the phase 1 project initiation and management, of which this next slide talks about in bullets, and we'll go ahead and move to the graphic after that. On the following slide is phase 2. And in phase 2, we're really getting into the meat of the project. You can tell, go forward, just like 1 or 2, one more. The meat of the project. Like any good phasing diagram, this looks slightly chaotic. It's not necessarily sequential, but it does build from each other, different pieces of the puzzle coming together. Y'all can see in the very bottom left-hand corner there, those first 2 commission and board meetings that we're participating in here, both yesterday and today. But coming out of this, we were actually looking more externally and broadly as we engage the broader community, some in facilitated and targeted stakeholder interviews, and then with broader community open houses. We'll have a digital component to that engagement as well to make sure we're providing as many touch points in the
And we
process.
tentatively have that first community meeting scheduled for December 2nd.
Yes.
Details to follow,
Yeah.
but
Pencil, not pen yet, but yes, yeah, roughed into the calendars there. And as we move from the kind of initial engagement and existing conditions analyses phases, our final phase, phase 3, coming out of the orientation and getting that input, is really pulling it all together into the plan development phase, which is making sure that the regulatory guidance, the draft plan itself, and subsequent meetings with y'all and council, which we're hoping to have multiple touch points throughout the process, we get that verification of where we're taking our understanding of the analysis forward. Throughout that process, again, still engaging the broader community through continued stakeholder meetings and broader community touch points, with the hope of wrapping up in July of 2026.
And talk a little bit about our kickoff meeting that we had. We had a walking tour on August 21st. Really very useful. It was led by Zach and Ryan and Shauna, who really walked us through all of the critical issues and all of the perimeter and all the buildings that were important. You can see who was here at that meeting. MIG represented Rick Barrett, Mark was here, and Stephen Davidovos was here as well. From our office, it was me, John Murto, and Lucy Nielsen. We really had the opportunity to walk the entire perimeter. We were there about 2.5 hours, hit about 110 by the time we finished, but we were tough and we got through it. We got toughened up in Tucson. So next slide, please. And we started out with a map of the downtown core and worked our way through. This is an annotated map. Tells us sort of where we're going. We started at City Hall. We headed up essentially north past the Hayden Mill, and then over to the Gonzalez Martinez house, down through Ash Avenue, and then back down back to where we started. We got to see all of the key buildings. We had a really good seminar after in the conference room in this building, where we established what appeared to be the proper boundaries to the core. It doesn't include every single building, but it really set for us what the edges of our study are, but doesn't mean that things outside that edge will not come into play. We talked about goals, we talked about objectives, and we looked at a revised schedule. And so we got a huge amount done that day, and that was really our initiation into the details of this. We'll come back to some of those in a minute. On that tour, we got to see some really interesting buildings. Andre House, on the Andre building on the right, the First Congregational Church, the back end of the Hackett building on the left. And then the Ash Avenue buildings, I still can't sort quite out which ones are on the register and which ones are not. But it's really an interesting little settlement of buildings and kind of it really anchors that northwest corner of the district. And then there are some other buildings that are either listed in Tempe or on the National Register. This is Casa Loma, modified a fair amount, but still listed and still an important building right on Mill Avenue. I'll let Jen talk a little bit about the Hayden Mill.
Sure. So I'll chime in on the Hayden Mill. So I think I met several of you guys about a year ago. We put together the nomination for this. Happy to say it was listed this past winter. So I don't think I need to sort of update anybody on the history of this building. I think you all are probably pretty well versed in it, but obviously the versions that we're looking at now are the 1918 and 1951 silos. So one of the things with the Hayden flour mill that will be pretty important for this project and for future redevelopment of this project is that the National Register nomination was written in such a way that it enables rehabilitation tax credit. So one of the considerations that we have is infill and new construction, and this is a large parcel in an otherwise dense area. So one of the advantages of the nomination, the way it's currently written, is that there's an opportunity for infill development here, and that's certainly something that obviously we want to talk to everybody about, and also with as this project goes through, but want to sort of bring that up as another piece of this potential project.
One of the things that we noticed, or at least got our attention on the walk, is that there are a number of development negotiations involving historic buildings. You all know what's going on with the First Congregational Church. There's also the similar kind of discussion going on with the Gonzalez Martinez house. How do you develop it? How do you deal with the historic resources on site?
I think one house is presently on wheels.
It is. It was there the other day. The Walker House, as you know, is sitting up on wheels with a steel mat under it and a bunch of wheels for getting ready to move. And then ultimately the Hayden Mill will be that kind of site. And one of the things that occurred to us, and just throwing this out there early in the process, is that each one of those negotiations seemed like a one-off, like a standalone conversation that was based specifically on that particular site. And it seems like one of the things that we can do, and I'd love to hear a comment back from you all, is put some guidelines on how those negotiations proceed, so that you all, as the Historic Commission, have some guidelines, but also developers can have some guidelines, knowing what the rules might be, how things might proceed. It seems like it's proceeding, not necessarily badly, but it's proceeding on a case-by-case basis. And there might be some fundamental principles that need to guide each one of those decisions. So we'll talk about that later on.
Yeah. So as a starting point, taking what we understand the challenges to be, what we're starting to learn from our time on the ground and review of the background documentation, we're going to start orienting our process moving forward. And we've done that to around 5 or so goals. And first and foremost, and the starting point is the celebration of history. That's our starting point here as we think to all these other pressing needs and considerations that the CorQ is getting to. So some of that is through the expansion of protections for historic resources. We know that comes with the need to balance context-sensitive development. That's a goal of a harmonious built environment. If you have historic resources and you have new needs, that context sensitivity is really important. So the guidelines that CorQ is speaking to and how we establish known quantities for developers, so they know going into it what the expectations are from a preservation standpoint or a community standpoint, is we find to be mutually beneficial, because the results of that are these vibrant mixed-use areas, which Mill Avenue largely is to a certain degree. There's a lot of uses that are coming together along this central spine. So when we think about the historic resources in that space and the introduction of new development, right, is we want to make sure that that's building towards something that supports that vibrancy, and that can be through adaptive reuse. It can be through new financial incentives to balance development pressures, whether that's regulatory tools the city puts forth or other avenues, so that when achieved, we think about the role, and this goes back to the approach language that we established in the front end, of a successful place is in part being economically viable, and the vitality of economic feasibility is really important. So there's already movement around underutilized parcels and infill development there. There's not many left really in that space. So the guidance there is perhaps more critical now, and that there is a few places left to influence that. But the role of the downtown that it can play from a tourism standpoint, I think is equally important when we think about a region or a sub-region within Tempe that can benefit from the resiliency of all these different aspects working together, whether it's in the balance of density of new developments, the encouragement of educational or historic resources. Lastly, all that comes together, I think, in what the downtown Tempe core is, right? And that identity, that brand, that character, whether you're a student, a parent, a resident, a business owner, that brand, I think, and the experience of the public realm is a large contributing factor to that. The buildings contribute to it. How you get in between buildings, how you walk and experience the spaces is part of that. I want to make sure we're thinking through that throughout the process, as that's the kind of the resulting goal there. The plan area, as Corky noted, I'll just do a quick tee up for the boundary. As this is the first pass that y'all saw the marked up version on the spot as we were thinking through when you define downtown Tempe, and then when you define the core of downtown Tempe, and you do that in a way that is supposed to think to historic assets, new development. You have to set some sort of regulatory boundary so that as we develop recommendations, guidelines, and otherwise, we're aiming it in a certain direction. So our starting point here, and then Corky and
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the index on the right in terms of the sort of three categories of historic designation. There are 13 that are in the city of Tempe historic designation. I'm not going to go through that list. I'm sure you knew all of them. There are 5, now 6 on the National Register. We don't have the Hayden Mill on this list, but it's certainly there. And then eligible properties, Casa Loma, Gonzalez Martinez House, Josephine Frankenberger House, and then the Brown Strong House. Not clear to me, I haven't seen those inventory forms, not clear to me whether those are formal determinations of eligibility, whether it was SHPO or local, but we'll dig into those inventories and sort all that out. We had a question last night about the differences between those, but I will not burden you with that, and so we'll be looking carefully. One of our early project tasks is to look at those inventory forms and put them all together into a single report, so we have a comprehensive version of that. Also do another detailed walkthrough, see if anything's been missed, if something's wrong with the inventory. So we're going to sort of clean up that whole diverse set of inventory forms into a single document and put some order into that as we move forward. Jen, other things to?
No, actually, I think that we just wanted some clarification on what eligible, who determined what was eligible or recommended what was eligible on the last 4 properties.
And you'll note that some of the properties on some of those lists are outside the boundary. That doesn't mean we're going to ignore them. So for example, the Gonzalez Martinez is just off to the northeast corner. Where we are right now is just outside that as well.
And some of that was influenced by existing maturity of conversations as to potential either development adjacent to or otherwise. But yeah, all part of the larger consideration. And the next steps piece of it, and we just want to go through the final point of orientation before we really hopefully turn all the talking over to y'all in this. Coming out of this, again, the very front end of the process, we're moving to the external engagement, targeted stakeholder meetings, broader community and engagement, both online and in person. And as Corky noted, really getting into the inventory update and finalizing both the boundary and the analyses of the so what's of the existing condition. So that's kind of compiled and otherwise. But from there, yeah, I think that's really on the presentation side, hopefully, again, done rambling at y'all, but the hope now is as we move forward, right, we have some tasks ahead of us. We want to make sure that we're hitting the points that need to be covered in this process to meet y'all's kind of, again, aspirations, or the things you're concerned about, or the things this plan needs to do from y'all's perspective and purview. And yeah, we're ready to chat. So thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. If I don't do this correctly or in the right order, please call me out.
We're a good test subject.
Really appreciate your grace. Since there's no one from the public here to speak on this item, I'll open it up to my fellow commissioners. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Go through your stakeholders again for me, please.
Sure, yeah, certainly. And this is not I can't do it here. This is not a complete list here. We had identified a few of those specific bodies, and that was working with the Native Nations organizations, the Tempe Historic Museum, and SHPO specifically. I think working with staff and with y'all's recommendations, if there's, hey, you need to be talking to these folks or these groups or these organizations, that's one of the things that we'll definitely you'll be listening to tonight. So if there are other folks in that space, and Zach, I'm not sure if there are other ones we've identified internally.
Yeah, so we're currently working with MIG to kind of finalize that list, but it would include the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, Tempe Chamber of Commerce. There's about, I want to say about eight or 10 entities on that list.
We're going to identify individual business owners and property owners and
That's right.
developers that are in the midst of or thinking about development. We really want to get everyone in the room, not all at once, but one at a time to listen to a variety of perspectives. And as Zach said, we have now a kind of a list that we're trying to boil down and pair up so that we can have appropriate people together in a meeting to get some very straightforward comments.
That's kind of where I wanted to get to, is
Sure.
the private side of things. Sounded like you had the public side of things more than covered. The last two plans that we've put together in the downtown were guided by a project area committee. And that project area committee was actually self-nominated and voted into place and represented all aspects of the residential and business community by quadrant within the downtown. They were the sounding group.
Yeah.
A lot of the other groups that we're talking about, the more public groups, were peripherally involved with it. But primarily, this was a project area driven plan, both of which were written by staff at their direction. I think it's really important, especially since how if you looking at that core area, I can point out 10 sites that under current zoning are eligible for high-rise development. Yet there's none of the historic buildings that are over 4 stories. It's going to have to be part of the negotiation process, because I'll sit here and tell you, I don't want to see anything over 4 stories, maybe 5. I'll give them a story. But those buildings are all important. We fought hard to keep that many in the process. Economics doesn't allow you to save everything. We paired historic buildings with new development to save the historic building. But the primary focus of that is the owners, especially in that block between 5th Street and 4th Street on the west side.
Mm.
You've got a couple of OG owners there, Stu Seifer, Vic Linhoff, that have been in the process since day one. And I can't imagine even beginning to put together a plan that doesn't include them. So that's my major concern, is that if we don't have all of those important voices at the table, then when it comes time to get the votes out, we're going to have a whole lot of people on the outside, and for that matter, on the inside, that are not going to be in favor of whatever plan we put together, because they weren't directly involved.
Yeah, certainly.
So by all means, go out of your way to make them involved, because we need that consensus. Especially you got Mission Palms across the street.
Hmm. They
They own the entire frontage of Mill Avenue from 2nd to 4th on the east side. They had planned a second phase. Economics at the time that they moved forward did not work. Tried again, including the flour mill. That didn't work.
Mhm.
We were overdeveloping everything. They're going to have to be comfortable. I mean, it's parking lots, and it's been that way for 20, 25, 30 years now. But it's a huge part of the value of their property. They've got to be comfortable with whatever the solution is moving forward, or it's going to be difficult to get it through.
That's good to hear.
How did the project area committees work? I mean, was it successful working by consensus? Was there a lot of disagreement on those committees? What is the, what,
Well,
what's the overview of
Let's
how
put it
that?
this way, we had basically two sides. The historic preservationists never saw an old building they didn't want to save. And the land developers who wanted to burn everything down and build a new shopping center. Put them in the middle with the staff. And it took us 18 months of twice monthly meetings to come up with a workable plan. Everybody finally realizing that what we needed was a salt and pepper mix of the old and the new, and that the new would make the old rehabilitation possible, and the old would give the character to the new. Now, that's been the plan for the last 25, 30 years. That's been moving forward, modified where needed through council action or whatever, mostly staff. But again, it's that consensus, because if you go at it as one's going to win over the other,
Sure.
it is,
Yeah.
there's too much economics. And it was bad back then. Now we got $200 a square foot land.
Yeah.
Uh,
Things have changed on
yeah.
that front. Well, we have new salt and new pepper, so
There we go.
we're gonna-
Yeah, it took us about 5 minutes into this project to realize that dichotomy was the essence of what you're dealing with. Developers on one hand who see old buildings, historic buildings as a nuisance, and then folks on the other side who treasure them. And so clear
Yeah.
from day one, I mean,
And-
literally the first 5 minutes, we said, oh, here's the way this works.
And Corky and Jen are in the nitty gritty of a lot of those individual assets and understanding the role that that individual building and beyond can play. This type of work I'm working on around the country, and you see cities who've lost that historic fabric. We're working right now in downtown Greensboro, and they have Elm Street. Charlotte had Tryon. They bulldozed Tryon, and now that was a big part of the 70s urban renewal, and they lost a lot of that identity. Greensboro's like, gosh, we held on to our historic fabric. How is that now an economic resource for us? And we think about developing these peripheries to drive visitation and everything in the painting, and figuring out how development can support historic preservation, I think is part of that middle ground, because the community benefits, the business owners end up benefiting, everything in between. So some of those regulatory tools, transfers of development rights and otherwise, are parts of the puzzle that we'll be trying to figure out together. But you're right, that middle ground, that's a tough place to be in. That's of kind of competing ideologies. And in our experience, we've found the middle ground, I think, in places, and that's the goal here. And it's always different, right? This has worked here, it hasn't worked here, but the goal is through this process to find what does work and what's contextually appropriate for Tempe that may have been a nugget of an idea that worked in this city or that city in this process. But
PMM, we're architects. We do lots of projects, and we do lots of projects that have a contemporary component and historic component. So we're often also in the middle of that conversation, trying to balance those two. And as you said, it's a hard thing to do. And part of our charge, I think, is to help the folks involved in that figure out an easier path, and particularly with guidelines that can really sort of set the stage and set the guardrails for what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we've done dozens of projects where we have historic material and new material on the same site, and how do we deal with that?
I was glad to see that you, at the corner of Rio Salado and Ash, picked up the relocated 5 over there. That was a major discussion in the
bet.
community. We knew that we loved those buildings. We wanted to save them. Moving them over there dropped them all off the National Register. And we kept thinking to ourselves, well, if we move them over here, they'll be here for another 100 years or more. They'll be back on the register. Well, interestingly enough, we're only about 10 years away, so.
We just did a project in Tucson. They just widened Broadway and we had 7 bungalows from the 20s and 30s that were in the way of the road widening. And we just moved them all back. Not quite as elaborate as wheels underneath. We just put them on rails and moved them back, put new foundations. And the goal that we had was that we kept the same relationship of the buildings to the curb of the street. And they all managed to stay on the register in that move.
As in, see, it's a,
Same site, just 50 feet further back. In the same relationship to each other as well.
well, I can talk forever, but I'll get off now and let my fellow colleagues go.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fackler. Anyone else? Anything else? Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
Hello. We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my first comment would be if you're going to work with the local tribes, please meet with them first. Do not wait until the end of this phase project to meet with them because they are busy. Their schedules are already booked well into the end of the year. So, reach out to them first to have discussions. My second question is there going to be any consideration for any visual impacts of the historic downtown core? And the reason I say that is because, Hayden Butte, that's not a name that the tribes refer to it. The tribal name is Oidbut, and it's culturally significant to the 4 southern tribes of Arizona, and to lose the visual sight of the butte from our respective communities is a concern that I have, because we have the high rises right there on the north side. They block the view of it, including the ASU Stadium. It blocks the view of that butte to the Salt River community. And that's not right. And I would hope that, a visual impact assessment should be addressed, because I agree with Chair Fackler's comments about the high rises. And in my mind, in the future, I cannot see how any of these high rises would be considered, a potential historic building. You know what I mean? Like there's no architectural differences of these high rises. But those are my 2 comment and question. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. We can, I'm not off the top of my head, I don't know that we've specified specifically a visual impact analysis as a deliverable in the process, but we'll work with Zach and Ryan and the team to figure out how we can take that into consideration for the recommendations and regulatory components. Certainly it's within our wheelhouse when we do that on a number of other projects, so we can look into how best to achieve that here.
You want to talk about your Native American team?
Yeah, certainly. And then just by way of extension, message heard there and Jen as well, but we work extensively with Native and Indigenous peoples around the country. We have a Native Nations studio at MIG, which is comprised of Indigenous peoples who work in our associated fields, and we work closely with them on all of our projects, especially here in the Southwest, where it's very, very pertinent. So yes, heard you loud and clear there, and that's definitely in our purview and scope, and we'll be moving that way moving forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Anyone else?
May I speak? Thank you. So could we go back to the plan of the central location where you were highlighting
The boundary? Yeah,
various
sure.
historic buildings.
Couple more. Yeah, that's one.
Yeah, this one. So I'm curious, in your walk around the city, did you find any buildings that are not currently either listed or shown on these particular lists?
Not
you
that jumped
thought
out at
were-
us, but that's going to be a very specific task we're going to undertake next. So we were here really as an orientation meeting, not as a discovery meeting. And so next on our list of things to do is to walk very carefully. Jen and I will be doing that together and evaluate each and every one of the buildings in the area
Mhm.
and see if anyone's have been missed. We'd love if you could point out any us to pay attention to.
I think he said he's waiting just as soon as it's out of the hundreds, just as soon as 99 that are back on the ground.
Next month, maybe.
Yeah, we're scheduled for October and November to do that work. So.
Okay, so I guess I'm kind of in the corner of Vice Chair Fackler in that the low elevation of the downtown street of Mel per se, I think is kind of important. And whether or not that's going to be able to be preserved, I guess I'm kind of curious about the overall plan and what the intent of the plan is. And maybe this is a question for Zach and Ryan is what kind of meat will this plan actually have as far as controlling or guiding development of the downtown area, particularly the historic downtown areas?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it'll be adopted by, it will have to be adopted by council. So it will be used as a guidance document, for, guiding development, future development, as well as historic preservation in the downtown. So, there's been some discussion about whether, certain things might, there might need to be some additional amendments to city code regarding certain items, but we haven't kind of come to. I mean, we're still in the kind of the planning stages, so we don't know what those would be, if anything. But those are discussions that we'll have as well. So, but the plan itself is designed to be a guidance document, just like the historic preservation plan, for example. So there will be priorities that will need to be implemented. But yeah, does that answer your question? Hopefully.
I guess I'm just not sure what that means. I assume it will
You're
probably
asking
go
what
to the
regulatory
council.
teeth it might have. Oh, actually, yeah. Ryan, you want to come on up to the party?
I can add a statement to that as well too. I think the regulatory framework will probably grow organically through this process and what we hear and find out through this development of this plan. So first and foremost, we need to develop and get approved plan, which is typically a policy document. And within that policy document, you might find directives or goals that would then create next steps for potentially regulatory items, codified or not, aspirations from the plans. And so we need to further develop and see if those are appropriate. One of the examples that they brought up was transfer of development rights, which is something that we are actually exploring as a bonus program through the master plan efforts in the past. That could be an optional way of saving, preserving historic buildings, but then transferring those density or development rights to a different property that's not historic. So all things to develop and consider. And it's really just the road and framework to get to the end of the process and find out what do we need to do as a city and as a town that.
So in regard to potentially developing a district, what do you think that will mean in terms of, height restrictions or materiality and use of particular types of building construction materials? What are you thinking there?
Well, so given we're out in the process, there's no presumptions going into it of what I think that should be. I think the hope is that y'all give us some of that guidance from your perspective. We want to learn that from our own technical analysis and the further engagement we'll do. District means a lot of different things in different contexts. So a historically designated district, a business improvement district, a general improvement. So the district piece of it as a regulatory kind of overlay tool, that's certainly something that through any good core process we'll be considering as the different mechanisms provide either guidance or clarity for both developers as well as the preservation community. But I'm not sure if I'm getting to what your query was specifically. Corky has.
Yeah, I
Correct.
mean, we talked a little bit about doing some inventory analysis and looking closely at existing integrity of buildings and see if there are others that would fall on the list. But in addition to that, we're going to look closely at the current zoning. We're going to look at the current ownership patterns, get a real sense of what the current entitlements are. We live in a state that has Proposition 207 that protects um, in-hand property rights, which becomes a difficult problem. In Tucson, we have now passed 1, 2, 3 overlay zones, which have all kinds of incentives built into them. But one of the things in our overlay zone is that if your development causes any building on the National Register or eligible to the National Register to be delisted or become ineligible, then you can't use that overlay. Kind of a very strong language, but typically, those of you who work in the development community know that this Proposition 207 is sort of a thing that sits over our necks all the time. And the best way to deal with that is on an incentive basis, because if you try to deal with it head on and strip away development rights without any consideration, you're going to get sued. And so that's a tricky part of that. We've had really good luck with incentives saying, here's what we want. We're going to offer you what you want if you meet what we want on the preservation side. And we've had, I don't know, since it's been in place, there have been 40 some odd new developments, 37 of which have used the overlay zone and protected the historic properties within that zone. So
That was a really good way of framing it in terms of scale of Tempe versus state. Big sticks, big carrots. A lot of carrots is kind of the goal that where he's getting at in that space.
it's just a tightrope that you have to walk in the context of Proposition 207.
So on this list, the ones that are in the red, those are not, they're historic, but they're not eligible and they're not
In the
registered
red on the
on the map.
the top, those are listed as City of Tempe Historic. And so,
Oh,
They have the
okay.
potential, though, to be National Register or, yeah.
So they've been adopted as City of
historic
Tempe.
in the City of
historic.
Tempe.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not national.
Okay.
Right?
And I understand from Zach that that means that there's a conversation about each one of these buildings in any development context.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Per the code, there have to be.
Well, what's interesting though is you would think that the National Register listing would give more protection, actually gives less, because if it's privately owned, there's no teeth in the National Register nomination as a way to protect property.
So your eligibility question though, all reds are blue, but not all blues are red. Kind of like all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. And that helps me when I think about it. But
And just a reminder too, when we talk about historic eligible, there's different meanings, of course, for that. Corky is referring to the kind of the formal or the formal eligibility. That's only, kind of technically and officially granted by the State Historic Preservation Office. When on our city websites, you'll see, historic eligible properties. Typically what we're referring to is a certain classification that's bestowed only by the Historic Preservation Commission that states that the property in question is historic eligible or eligible for the Tempe Historic Property Register. So the local register. Possibly it may have received a previous eligibility, been considered eligible by SHPO, but that's what that HE or the historic eligible property refers to. So.
And one of the things we'll be looking at is are there any things on the 13 on the top list that ought also be in the National Register? That also then becomes a question for the owner, whether the owner refuses to do that or not. So it gets a little tricky. This is what we have now, and we're going to study all those categories and all those inventory forms to see if they're right, if there are other things that qualify, and if there's anything that might move from a category. So eligible might move into National Register. Tempe Historic might also move to the National Register or not. I mean, we'll study all that.
And there's a few on that list, on the city list there, that are already listed in the national, they're dual listed in both
We're gonna
registers,
we're gonna have
actually.
a careful look at that.
Also, I was just curious about your community meetings. Are those true community meetings where anyone in Tempe is invited to come, or are those neighborhood? Are those going to be targeted to specific groups? Tell me about that.
Yeah, certainly. We're still developing the final strategy of which each one's going to entail based on where we're at in the process. But the intent of them is for there to be public meetings, community meetings. We're working through noticing procedures and policies, which every city is different in terms of what the communications and PIOs have as resources and how those get noticed. But yeah, the intent is that those are open community.
Particularly the first meeting in December is going to be noticed through the water bill, but also targeted lists of invitees above and beyond that. So a pretty general mail out for that.
And then those in the obviously engage in the process so far, you'll be strongly encouraged to tell all of your family and friends to make sure they come to those meetings as well. But yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? All right, I guess it's my turn. To Commissioner Williams's comment, I was wondering if you had any idea what your tribal outreach would look like thus far.
Yeah, so that would be in conversation with staff. We're working on a good example of kind of how we've approached it in other areas. We're working on Pima County's regional housing strategy at the moment, and their relationship with the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Pasquayaki tribe has been directed largely through staff. So we'll start with staff guidance on that. I want to know how the current relationship is based on our other work in areas. We have other relationships with different tribal entities, but we want to make sure we're taking direction from y'all or staff as to how those relationships or paths of communication have been established previously and start there. We understand the importance of relationships and trust and engagement with not just Native nations and Indigenous peoples, but with other underrepresented communities. So we want to make sure that we're going with the most effective and intentional paths possible. And that's going to start with some guidance from staff, and then we'll move from there. So I'm not sure.
And I'll just add a little bit too. Yeah, thanks, Mark. So yeah, Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community and Gila River Indian Community are both listed as stakeholders, and so they'll be consulted at those stakeholder meetings, and surely will be additional communication through my office, through our consultants as well. But they're vital. I know that, and I understand that tribes often don't like to be referred to as stakeholders, but they're important partners in this conversation. We understand that.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And I am curious, how did this boundary change after your walkthrough?
Oh, good question. Well, we went into it actually boundaryless, and we had a general walk. We core like, all right, some affiliation with Mill Avenue, Rio Salado to the north, University to the south was generally our starting point. And the walking tour encompassed the majority of the properties that are shown on this map. You'll note that there are some that fall outside of it, and part of it is either in consideration what the adjacent development is, where developments already are, just because there's a building there right now, or there's something happening. There's obviously a lot of other active development in the area. So to the degree that this plan can influence some of that, there's a consideration of where to establish that. We also took into consideration what the age of some of the buildings outside of it were. Corky, and feel free to
Yeah, it's a draft boundary. So one of the things that we're happy to hear about today is, did we get it right? And any suggestions for changes to that would be welcome.
Yeah.
I would encourage extending it to include Tempe buildings that are on the historic register. I know including the Butte is going to be a thing of dispute, but it's something that I would love to encourage, especially to Commissioner Williams's point that that is critical when doing a viewshed analysis and of the highest importance. So I think including it in the boundary would facilitate doing that visual analysis. And so I'm curious as to why the church is on the outside. I know it's undergoing some changes right now, but I would love to see that included as well. I think the more, while it will look kind of funky, I think the more resources we can include in there that speak to Tempe's history, particularly ones with good integrity, and particularly the really early ones like the Gonzalez Martinez House and the First Congressional Church in the Butte, that's going to give you, I feel like it will tee you up to give a better story and to provide a better analysis to guide those development agreements and development regulations. I think that covered my second thing. Hold on.
Okay.
I was curious also if what considerations are archaeology given in your ideas for development regulations?
To Rocky or Jen, you want to chime in on that one?
You're like,
Throw Jen under the,
Yeah.
throw Jen under the bus.
the former archaeologist, yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a consideration just because of the Butte and the proximity to all of this to the Butte and the fact that it's a TCP and that we have known cultural resources in this area. So yeah, absolutely, there would have to be, again, in whatever guidelines come out of this, there would definitely have to be a consideration for cultural resources that are not just the built environment. So there may be some, stipulations in there about what the funding source is, what local ordinances and requirements are for archaeological clearance or not clearance or avoidance, whatever it may be. So yeah, that will have to be a consideration on this as well.
I want to go back to your question about particularly the First Congregational Church and the Gonzalez Martinez House being not in the district. Part of what we heard on our talk was that those deals are done. Those are set in stone and are going to happen in a very specific way. So it was as if we're planning and these are already happening, should they be in the plan or not? That really was the question. We are well aware of the importance of those two that I just mentioned, but does it make sense to revisit or to include something in a plan that is already underway? I'd be interested in your comment on that, whether it makes sense or not.
Sure. I see the logic behind it. I think it would be a good idea to include to show maybe why that development is incompatible with whatever regulations that we're looking to achieve and whatever your conclusion may be after your project. I think it would be really great, especially with the church. You have these two somewhat opposing ideas juxtaposed, right? So I think it would be really helpful to look at almost like a case study as to what is and what isn't working for the character of the downtown historic core.
Yeah, we've asked Ryan and Zach both for the process on those sites and the development agreements. So we're going to study those either way, whether it's physically in the boundary or not. We agree that there are great lessons to be learned by how that happened, how the area committees operated, and exactly what does it say in the development agreement, and what can we learn from that? Perhaps to do a better job next time, perhaps to do the same job. I haven't read those, so I don't know yet, but we've asked for those documents independent of where the boundaries of the district are.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fackler.
I follow up on those as well. I understand what you're saying. The development agreements are in place moving forward. But I'll tell you, I've seen development agreements on that flour mill, 5 of them over the last 40 years. This one, I think, has the best chance because it's not overbuilding the site. But, there's still a bunch of millions of dollars that got to move from one group to another. I'd love to see that protection in place for the flour mill, which I'm sure you will. But I'd do the same thing with the house and the church. Yeah, the city is going to end up owning both of those buildings, but there's city councils change, mayors change, developers change. It'd be nice to have some logical thought behind the processes that would guide any change in decisions that are made there. As far as boundary, I think you could probably move from University up to Seventh. I don't know how you would do St. Mary's on an island. And for that matter, the Garfield Goodwin House are not that hard. That's the Harrington Burchett House is number 5 there. I could see if the walker was going to stay in place, you could just run a leg down 7th Street, but we're moving the walker. And ultimately, that may be the fate of the Harrington. But I think if you put too much, especially too many of the mid-rise, high-rise buildings in the core, then it dilutes the emphasis on the core being a low or lower intensity district, especially as it relates to height. And I think, in my mind, I would wholeheartedly want to see the Butte go in. I mean, our Commissioner Williams talked earlier about the view corridors. Well, the only true remaining view corridors from Mill Avenue. And it's only because the Lowe's company owning those 2 parking lots that are viewing from the southwest. If the Butte's in there, then that's another concern for keeping those view corridors open. I mean, I'll sit here and tell the city council and the mayor that the city just passed a $12 million bond. Go out there and buy the parking lot north of the railroad tracks from the Lowe's Corporation and put that into city control, and let's make sure that view corridor remains. We don't need Mill Avenue buildings to carry us along that. You put a nice urban park there in conjunction with the flour mill, that'll carry people down to the Rio Salado. I mean, sat behind the desk for 30 years trying to push the development of that flour mill to connect the east side of Mill Avenue to the lake. There's other ways to do that. And especially now that we've got some 20 or 30,000 parking spaces and it's a downtown area, we don't need any more parking structures built to support development. That's why I think the current plan for the flour mill has an honest to God chance of being built. And building out that parking lot to the south as an urban park in support of the Butte and its views, I really think the Butte should be in the district.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Got it. One of the things that you mentioned, or at least made me think of it, is that you talked about the church and the Gonzalez Martinez house becoming city property. One of the things that at least I would argue to pay attention to is once that moves into city ownership, how does it get maintained? I've seen a lot of cases where cities take ownership of historic properties, but their budget doesn't allow them to do proper maintenance on those buildings, and things go south pretty quickly. We're working on several buildings in Tucson that City of Tucson Parks and Recreation owns, but they have no resources for maintenance at all. And so things are, in some cases, falling down just out of neglect. So the issue of maintenance and budget for maintenance in city-owned historic properties is important.
To respond to that, I'd say Zach, as historic preservation officer, by God, if he owns it, he ought to maintain it. So
Give that man a broom. Was it? Yeah.
Oh, no, give that man a budget, I think is really the point. I mean, part of the issue is that, the responsibility is given to maintain those buildings without an appropriate resources to do that.
Well, the community just gave him $12.5 million.
There you go.
So.
I won't worry about it then.
But those are the types of things.
I sure do understand what your concerns are.
Yeah.
But for those types of recommendations, all the backing behind it is certainly part of our consideration as we dig into, if recommended, then got to make sure that it's sustainable in that space, socially, economically.
Why my mic's hot. Want to call your attention to two buildings in particular at the corners of, that'd be Fifth Street and what is it, Forest? No, not Forest. God, you think I'd know my streets by now. The two Mountain Bell buildings is right at the corner, adjacent to your line on the west side. One north of Fifth, one south of Fifth. Those buildings, interestingly enough, are over 50 years old. They've been highly important to the community as they have served for communications for not only Tempe, but for the entire Southwest for many, many years. What concerns me is that the state of communications is changing every day in this country. And in fact, there's no longer Mountain Bell going through there. They're being used for other purposes and whatnot. Those sites have tremendous value.
And
The
that's just south of the 4 icon, those two buildings.
Yeah.
Step and down. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, and the one south of that one is the old Ellingson warehouse. It was a seed warehouse. We were looking to redevelop it way back when. It previously was another block further to the south.
And that's the one directly south of Fifth, or that's the one
No,
south of
one
that?
just north of Sixth.
Oh, north of Sixth. Okay. Oh, is that Snakes and Lattes? No.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. You
Love that spot. It's my
was
favorite place.
the chaos, but now it's
Okay,
back to
yeah.
that. But before we could do anything with the building, it caught on fire and burned down.
Ah,
We went out of our way to save all the bricks, and the developers of Centerpoint, who was working on that, agreed to rebuild it in that location, augmenting the bricks as necessary, but using the same architectural style to rebuild the building. It has value to the community and not necessarily historic now. Give it another 20 years and it'll have a historic basis. So those three in particular, I'm concerned about being prime development sites. And two prime.
Yeah.
You know, if the Mountain Bell buildings came down, another 4, 5-story compatible architectural buildings went there, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But if somebody pops in 2 more 20-story towers on that adjacent to all those historic buildings, no, I'd hate to see that. Okay, I've seen.
Sure. Thank you, Vice Chair Fackler. To that point, is a resurvey a part of this project?
there was a community survey?
A historic resource survey?
There's an inventory check, but I wouldn't say it's a full-blown
But I mean, yeah,
historic resource survey.
I mean, probably not to the level of doing a new inventory for everything, but enough to be able to take some of the information that you shared tonight to be able to go property by property and be able to assess whether or not there are additional properties outside the list that we have here that need to be included, like the ones that you just mentioned. Also, what kind of changes, have happened to those properties too over time. But, and then there'd be some, fact checking on some of the existing property inventory forms too, because as we all know, as over time, what we know about the past and individual properties changes. And sometimes there's some misinformation in them. So we might want to do a couple checks on some of those. But yeah, but if there are, ideally, the goal would be to find additional properties to add to this list that are worthy of part of this historic district. And also to be able to look at kinds of changes and materials and things like that, that would go to the guidelines as another part of the document.
Awesome. So like if it's over 50 years, take a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, see if it's eligible or not. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So it'd be nice to have more than just a handful of properties.
It would. It really would. Especially, no one loves slump block, but I love slump block. So it would be nice to have a second look. You too? Good. Okay. Let me see. I have one more thing. What are you mentioned infill around the mill on that parcel, or I guess the parcel south of it, because that mill parcel is weird and that is the whole thing is designated. What are your initial thoughts on infill?
Well, I mean, part of the nomination for that was with the idea that in order to make that a viable parcel, again, unless there's, an ideal world, you wouldn't be able to have to put anything else on that property. But given all of the attempts at redevelopment of that property are sort of contingent on new construction. And so we sort of crafted in such a way to show that actually that parcel, the way that we see it today, did not exist or look like that historically, that there was continually properties that came up and got demolished, and and so there's always sort of property or other buildings on that property historically over time. With that said, I mean, me personally, I would like to see it left as is, but it's probably not going to happen. But we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for rehabilitation tax credits. And, and unfortunately, in order to make that happen, you're probably going to have to do infill on it. And so that would dictate the height of the infill, the massing of the infill, so that whatever you get on that parcel is going to be much more compatible to the size, scale, materials of the mill and the mill's history, as so that you aren't going to be getting, none of us would want to see it anyway, but you're not going to get a giant high rise plunked on the back of that. The other thing being that even if you don't use the tax credits, and we still want the opportunity for that property to be redeveloped, because that has been everybody's wish for decades now, is that for that to happen, is that, hopefully that the documentation that's in place will act as existing guidelines for what gets put in its place. And it's something that you all could use too when you're reviewing plans, that come up in the future. Does that answer your question? Okay.
It does. The only challenge I foresee for y'all would be that entire parcel. I understand like it was different for the National Register nomination for the purpose of the tax credits, but that entire parcel is on the Tempe Historic Property Register. So I foresee a challenge trying to kind of put the two together, because any alterations are going to have to meet Secretary of Interior standards. I know you know this, and come to the commission. So I would love to see kind of that balancing act. It would help us if it were more explicitly spelled out. And of course, we want to see this redeveloped. We want to see this property used. So I foresee that as a challenge.
Assume just, that because it's on the Tempe Register, that anything like that is always going to get reviewed with or without these documents, that the team's putting together, that, absolutely, it would have to get reviewed. So it has to get through you. It has to get, through the Park Service, if it goes to that route or not, it may stay at the local level and not have to go anywhere else. But I would absolutely assume that all of you would be reviewing anything that happens to that property, and like the other ones on the list. Yeah.
And to confirm, that's the only challenge y'all see for us?
There's there's some.
Okay.
There's just some. My last question is for Mr. LeVake, actually, if you don't mind helping me out. I have a question about your response to Commissioner Robinson earlier, about what is the goal for this plan? Are we just suggesting changes to development agreements, or are we actually, is there going to be any way that, is this just like a warm fuzzy thing to deal with development agreements, or are we actually going to have some teeth?
Well, development agreements are a city council tool authority, so they have control over that process. I don't think this body has a recommendation decision on how that happens. Certainly there could be helpful tips, plans, goals on identifying supportive incentives that could be utilized or identified in terms of weighing out public benefits for certain projects. That could be an element. But what I was describing was that, creating a plan and policy similar to like a general plan, where you have those guiding tools and elements that could hopefully help dictate and provide some guidance to create some regulatory action or regulatory controls, which is something that could be strived for out of this process.
Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it. Sorry to make you get up and come all the way over here.
No, that's okay.
I appreciate it.
That chair is more comfortable than.
Oh, and I did want to note too, actually, on the eligible properties, the Gonzalez Martinez property is actually on the National Register.
Correct. Yeah, it is. It is listed in the National Register, and it has been classified as historic eligible by the Historic Preservation Commission. So.
We actually put that in there as a test to make sure Zach was paying attention, and they did catch it. They took him away.
Well, I was just being polite, but I was going to tell you later. No, Ryan was good to point that out. So.
Okay.
Chair, I have just one question. Is the railroad station not on the list, or did something happen to that? And I'm just not aware.
That one's been a concern for a while because of how many modifications have happened to it. I know there's been lots of discussion over the years, but yeah. I think that's a tricky one.
It's designated, yeah, it's designated low. Yeah, it's got designations, but yeah, I think it's kind of part of the conversation. Yeah, in terms of whether it's included. You know, because again, yeah, it's kind of a little bit kind of in the border area or close to it that we were talking about, but yeah, I mean, it hasn't been ruled out specifically, but. Yeah.
Still is there.
Yeah.
You're
yeah.
correct. I mean, again, some of
It'll be redeveloped. Yeah.
Once we accomplish that initial inventory, we may be able to sort of fill in these gaps. And so you may have a more robust district than what currently looks like. So then, you know, when we do have properties like the former depot, that might be somewhat problematic. We may not have to worry about them as much if we're able to fill in a little bit more within the existing boundaries. You know, we may have more properties within that, so that if we, you know, don't highlight something that has been mucked with over generations, that maybe that's better, and versus taking it in because we don't have enough to show people.
Right.
And I'll add too, I think we put that sort of at the perimeter of the property, of the boundary as well, because again, another similar project where it has entitlements, it has a development agreement with certain obligations. I think the property went to you all as recommendation process and included you in that process. And I think there was a commitment that upon completion and execution of the construction, that then they would designate the property historic as a result of completion of the process. So that's in an entitlement stage, but it hasn't started any construction or actual building permits at this time. So it's a little bit in a state of unknown right now. For a couple of years now. 6 years? Give or take a year. Still active entitlement, still active development agreement. But of course, you've got office component and then a hotel.
That's good for me. Thanks.
All right, and unless there's any final thoughts, that's all the thoughts I have. I really, really appreciate all y'all's hard work on this. We're really excited. We pushed for this really hard, so I'm looking forward to seeing results.
Yeah, we'll be back soon.
I want to thank Mr. Fackler for taking this out of order. Thank you.
Yes, 9B. All right. Thank you all so much.
We can go home, maybe still after our bedtime.
Appreciate y'all. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
I cannot get back to my computer to see the agenda. Oh, wait, it's going to work now that you got up. It's working now. Yeah, thank you for standing up.
They planned that joke.
All right, that concludes agenda item 9B. Now we'll move on to agenda item 9A, overview on upcoming zoning and development code text amendments. I don't have who's presenting, so you'll have to introduce yourself.
That's no problem. Thank you, commissioners. I'm Jacob Payne. I'm a principal planner with the City of Tempe's Community Development Department. I'm here tonight to give you an update on some upcoming changes to our zoning and development code as a result of some new state legislation. These have some implications in the historic preservation realm, so we wanted to share it with this group and get some feedback and discussion. Go ahead, next. So there's going to be two of these that I'll go over. We're running these processes to update our code simultaneously. So the first one that we'll look at, 2721, is relating to the concept of middle housing. So I'll give you an overview of what exactly the state law says now, and then what the city of Tempe is implementing in our ordinances to comply with it. And then a similar rundown of House Bill 2447, which has to do with what types of entitlements that cities and towns in Arizona now have to conduct administratively as opposed to through public hearing processes. So starting with the middle housing, House Bill 2721, this was actually passed in May, that's a typo, of 2024. And what this particular statute does in Arizona is requires that all cities and towns with a population of more than 75,000 allow missing middle housing, as defined duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and up to 4 townhomes on 2 sets of properties within their jurisdiction. So the first set of those properties is going to be all lots zoned for single family residential within 1 mile of the jurisdiction's central business district. And I'll show you what they mean by that on a following slide. But additionally, they would apply this also to at least 20% of any new development that is more than 10 contiguous acres. So the provisions of this statute are required that cities and towns that meet that population threshold have an ordinance adopted to this effect by January 1st of next year. So on the previous slide, mentioning all of the single family residential property within 1 mile of the central business district, this portion of statute has a specific definition for what that means. And that's spelled out here on this slide, essentially as the area that the municipality designates as its downtown or equivalent, that is kind of that community attraction for activity and primarily non-industrial. Some further points of this statute, as they usually do when we see new House bills relating to powers of cities and towns, they give us a list of things that they prohibit us from doing and as part of our ordinance to comply. So some of these things include doing anything that would make the construction of middle housing impractical, restricting them to less than 2 floors, restricting them to a lot coverage of less than 50%, doing anything as far as permitting or review processes that end up being more restrictive than what we would typically do for single family homes within that same zoning district. We also can't require owner occupancy of any of the units that develop as middle housing. We can't require them to comply with commercial building code, and we cannot require more than 1 off-street parking space per unit. They do allow us specifically to do 2 things, which is continue to allow single family homes in our single family districts, as well as include, if we would like to, additional types of middle housing that aren't explicitly specified as part of the new statute. It also gives some exemptions as to where these middle housing areas can go. So I've put asterisks next to a couple of them that will affect us as the city of Tempe, but those are things that, like, places where the urban services aren't going to be able to accommodate the additional units, property that's not zoned residentially, and of course those areas that are in the vicinity of an airport where noise sensitivity might be an issue. So in order to comply with this, what we have done in the city of Tempe is we put together an ordinance to adopt what will be a new overlay district. So on this map here, gives you an idea of what properties would fall within that overlay district. So everything in gray that you're seeing are our single family zoned properties within 1 mile of our central business district or our downtown area, minus the airport noise area. So this is affecting 2,020 parcels in the city of Tempe. It's probably a little difficult to see on the map without the color. This is for the ordinance that will be included. That's why it's black and white. But essentially on the western edge there, where the kind of swoop of the radius goes up, that's Priest Drive. On the bottom there is Broadway. And then on that eastern end, you'll see Rural Road. And then that one that looks kind of like the top of where the gray parcels begin is University Drive. There are some single family zone properties north of University that are just outside of the airport noise area that would also be included in this overlay. So in this overlay, the following standards would apply. You would be allowed a single duplex, single triplex, single fourplex, or up to 4 townhomes being individually subdivided and sold per lot. Per state statute, we would be requiring a single on-site parking space per unit. So for a fourplex, that would come out to 4 parking spaces on the site. Height and setbacks are going to be allowed per what the zoning already has. So for the single-family zones, we typically have a height restriction of 30 feet. So since we apply that to single-family homes, statutorily, we're going to have to apply the same restrictions for middle housing. The one that is different is our lot coverage. Since the statute restricts us to doing anything less than 50%, we've set it at 50% for middle housing, which does represent an increase in our usual single-family zone district, R16. That number is normally 45%. The second set of properties that I talked about, those that are greater than 10 contiguous acres, it would be the same overlay district, but the way that it would work is that a development that comes through that wants to do single family and opt into this middle housing would do so at that time and designate up to 20% of their land area towards the development of middle housing, and it would be an option. So processing for how this would work moving forward, a property owner who has an eligible property within the overlay applies for the minor development plan review conducted and approved by city staff. This is our current process that we use for any multifamily development that's 5 units or less. So this is following the same procedure that we currently have. After that, typical process follows for building permits and inspections. The one thing I wanted to point out is that for properties that are designated on the Tempe Historic Register, we can continue to do the things that we would normally see. If they want to demolish the building, we can do the stays of demolitions. If they're looking to modify a designated building to accommodate extra units, we can go through the proper certificate procedures for depending on the scope of whatever the request looks like. Before I get into the second one, I wanted to take a pause and we can talk about this one because I know it's a lot. Oh, sure. So one thing that I'll note about this particular statute, as I mentioned earlier, it passed last summer. And you'll know that now it's been 1.5 years that we've had this information, that we've been waiting to put together an ordinance. One of the reasons for that is, and notably absent from this particular bill, is the exemption of historic properties. For other housing related bills that we've seen come through the state legislature, they do occasionally put in that clause that exempts historic districts and properties from things like this. So we were waiting to see if an amendment would come through. And in February, there was one put forward by the state legislature that was a House Bill 2719 that would do just that, add a clause to this portion of statute to exempt any locally or nationally designated districts or properties from being required to allow for middle housing if they're in those areas. It was read in the House, the State House, and it was not voted on. So it's dead currently. That doesn't mean that we might not see one at a later legislation for the next session, but just something that I wanted to mention. It was something that we had communicated through our government liaison that we would like to see, as well as other cities and towns in Arizona. We lobby for the same thing.
Thank you for the update. Any comments, thoughts, questions while we're on our pause? Yeah. Continue, please.
Okay.
Sorry we didn't give you a break.
That's fine. So the second one, House Bill 2447, it relates to municipal administrative reviews. So the section of state statute that this one amended is actually a relatively new one in itself that relates to what processes cities and towns can do at a staff level. So this portion of statute used to say that cities and towns may do these processes administratively, things like site plan, development plans, and subdivisions. So this amendment came through and all they did was change the word may to the word shall, requiring that we do those things. So like I said, it applies to site plans, any type of design review. and all types of subdivisions. So whether that just be lot combinations or splits to entire new subdivisions, amended subdivisions, this statute now requires that we do that at a staff level. Just like the other one, the time that they give us to have this implemented is by the beginning of next year. They do provide us some exemptions to requiring administrative reviews. One of these actually came in the form of an amendment later on. House Bill 2928 put in an exemption that clarifies that historic preservation related hearings about design development plans can still go through public hearing processes. So how you are all used to seeing items for certificates of appropriateness that can continue. They've specifically exempted that from being something that has to be done at a staff level. The other one that's pertinent to to Tempe is that we have our joint review commission that hears design-related items on mixed-use educational zoned properties owned by the Board of Regents. So we have an agreement already intergovernmentally with the state that allows that commission to also continue to hear design-related items at public hearing. So what we've done in our zoning code is basically run through all of our chapters and parts and fix up the duties and powers of our boards and commissions so that anything that we now have to make a decision on as a staff is removed from the power of that board or commission. Kind of a detour that we made along the way was updating one of our zoning overlay districts that had some additional requirements about public hearings and design. And then in the final part 6, that's where we go into all of the details about our applications and processes. So of course we went through and updated how those processes operate. So for both of these ordinances, like I said, we're running them in tandem since they both need to be adopted by the beginning of 2026. For the middle housing overlay, since we're processing that as a zoning amendment, it had an extra step in the form of a neighborhood meeting, which we hosted back on August 4th. But for both ordinances, they get one recommendatory hearing from the Development Review Commission, which actually happened last night, and then 2 city council hearings for introduction and a final hearing, which we've got scheduled for October 16th and then November 6th of this year. And I think that's all. So we'll open it up again for any comments or discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. We do have one member of the public to provide public comment. Can you please come up and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Rob Moore, Tempe, Arizona, and I'm currently serving as the chair of the Tempe Preservation Foundation. And it goes without saying that there's a lot of concern, not only with our organization, but across the community as to how this will impact our historic neighborhoods. And one of my questions is obviously, and I forget the date, I should have looked, Minneapolis kind of started the snowball in 2018, 2019. But at this point, California too, I think maybe their laws went into effect 5 years ago. I'm kind of curious what we know with those canaries in the mine shaft, the actual impact this has on historical neighborhoods. And if there is a silver lining or how have, in a way, those places that have already seen this application adapted. I'm kind of curious about that. And equally, in terms of the new historical preservation plan, how does that impact what has been set in place? And does anything need to be amended or adjusted along those lines as well? Those are really my 2 general questions.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So yeah, I haven't studied those 2 the locations that Mr. Moore mentioned, so I can't really speak to how those have played out in terms of the overall impact on historic properties. I would imagine that at this point, like I'm still hopeful that there will be an amendment. Of course, they can't be guaranteed at some point to exempt historic districts. There's certainly been more media coverage recently. I don't know if you've seen, particularly on the KGVZ, there's a story about a historic district in in Phoenix, and some pressure by that historic district, regarding this issue. I think that if changes that do occur, I think the impact would not be felt immediately, because obviously, buildings that this doesn't apply to buildings that are being, modified, altered, new additions built on properties. This would really be for, kind of vacant lots, and, properties that would be demolished, and then something rebuilt, on that site. So, and if I'm misspeaking, let me know. But, so, I think that, obviously those processes take time. And so, I think overall, it would have obviously potentially a detrimental impact, particularly to historic districts in the city. But it would be kind of a slow process. So I'm hopeful that process will be, kind of rolled back, perhaps when or exempted when we're talking about historic districts. In terms of the historic preservation plan, and I don't know that there would be any kind of specific things in the historic preservation plan that would be, kind of contrary, to this. But in terms of priorities that we've implemented or plan to implement, I have to look at that more closely. But certainly, obviously anything that would be in conflict with the ordinance and the state law, we would amend or simply not carry out. But I'll let Mr. Payne continue.
Sure. Thank you, Zach. Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, about talking about what this might mean for the future of some of these places, and talking about case studies. I know that, as Rob was talking, this has happened in other states before Arizona. We're a little late on this kind of legislation coming our way. States like California, Colorado, for sure have passed a lot of this preemptive housing type regulation. But an example that we can kind of talk about that's maybe a little bit closer to us that might be a little relevant, if you want to go back to the slide where I've got the map. One thing about the middle housing ordinance is that we're talking about affecting properties that only currently have single family zoning right now. So looking at this gray area, you can kind of see that part of the middle missing, right? No pun intended, of where the gray parcels are. There's kind of that hollow space where we have the Maple Ash neighborhood, portions of Mitchell Park, Wilson Art Garden. And the reason for that is those neighborhoods, some decades ago, were actually rezoned to multifamily designations to accomplish what the intention of the state legislature is setting out to do right now, which is to do the soft density in these areas that are close to urban centers. And you can see that, it's been that way for some time, probably maybe the 70s was when the city endeavored, 60s, maybe even earlier, to get that housing typology. And for certainly it's been effective, and we see duplexes and small multifamily type housing in those neighborhoods, but still, even decades later, retaining a lot of single family homes. So like Zach was kind of talking about, these changes going to be incremental over time is probably what we'll see. The state handing us a lot of mandated tools in relation to housing. So this is just one of them as well. The new provisions for ADUs that the city of Tempe has adopted, also for consideration, of a property owner looking to maybe get rental income, have a place for family to stay. They might look to build a backyard unit before they look to knock down their home and build a fourplex. But having those options to provide it, yeah, we'll have to see how that turns out. But it's incremental change for sure, and these new options, it's going to be up to whatever's the most effective for what a property owner is looking to do as far as either expanding what they own or looking for income on the property.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Moore, for your comment and your question. I'll open it up to commissioners online if there's any comments. Okay. All right. Commissioners, anything, questions, comments?
Sure.
Vice Chair Fackler?
This is a cluster. And we've got a cluster in that area to the west between Mill Avenue and Priest. A lot of what saved Maple Ash was redevelopment of downtown made those properties so damned expensive that they were saved by the value of the property. Further to the west, that hasn't been the case. I mean, those properties have increased in value, but not exponentially like Maple Ash and the close-in neighborhoods did. What really concerns me is that a large part of those properties are currently investor-owned. Those investors have essentially been holding on to those properties. They knew they were never going to be able to get them rezoned multifamily because of all the additional restrictions that come along with those districts. Now, this is taking away a lot of those restrictions and actually paving the path. I can just see a bunch of them out there licking their chops that say, you know, I've been putting money into this money pit. Now I can tear it down and build a duplex or a fourplex and actually start to gain on my investment. And what you're saying is in those areas, we really have no tools at all.
Commissioner Fackler, Vice Chair Fackler. That's correct. So the language of the statute restricts us from doing some really key things to try and combat the issues that you're talking about. So the first one being no owner occupancy restrictions. So we can't say that you have to live in one of the units on the property, which of course makes it challenging when you talk about investor-owned property. So that's kind of the first big one. The second one is, like you were saying, you know, owning a property that's R16, and if somebody had came to us and asked to rezone it to maybe an R2 or R3R, you know, it's likely that, hey, we couldn't support that. And now up to 4 units allowed by right kind of cuts out that process from our ability. But that's the language of the state law, giving us that 1 mile buffer from our downtown. You know, we're using right now our city center zoning to kind of create that boundary of our central business district. But, you know, using our downtown and drawing 1 mile, no matter how you slice it, you're capturing those neighborhoods that you're seeing here.
But there's no density requirement on an individual lot other than lot coverage.
That's correct. Yeah. The density requirement of the statute is 4 units max, regardless of the lot size. The only thing that we can control is that the lot needs to be a legal lot. So it has to meet our you know, minimum size for a lot. But on a 6,000 square foot lot, you can have up to 4 units.
I could get 3,000 square foot print on a 6,000 square foot lot.
Yes, that's correct.
Setbacks are still the same.
Setbacks will be the same.
I just see a nightmare of architecture. Bunch of 3-story needle buildings. Wow. Legislature just won't leave us alone.
Yeah. So there is a part 2 of middle housing that passed this past legislation, or this past legislator session, that relates to what's called standard plans or pre-approved plans, which is the idea that the city work with designers who draw up, you know, a plan for something, and then we review it, approve it to meeting our building code, and then have it on a library where somebody who owns property in the city can go to our library and say, I want to build that plan on my property. And it, you know, cuts out the part of having to go find an architect to work with and build a design. So there's another bill that becomes effective in kind of a tiered approach where beginning in July next year, all cities and towns are to have a standard plan library of accessory dwelling units and single family homes. And then by January of 2027, standard plans of duplexes and triplexes. So we've got a little bit of a start on the accessory dwelling unit one because we had a program to do exactly that before this new legislature came out. So more to come on how that works. We'll have to see. It's kind of a new thing for us in the city of Tempe. Other cities and towns are probably a little bit more familiar when they've done new master plan communities. A standard plan is a very common thing that, like especially suburban towns would do when they build new neighborhoods. But to your point, Vice Chair, about architecture, we're still trying to figure out what that would mean for us if we have a library of, say, triplexes that people can build in the city, and we end up seeing it in multiple places over and over again.
One final question from me. This is districts are being identified by their close proximity to the central commercial district. Are we seeing in these other communities, California's, Colorado's, whoever's, of that restriction going away? All single family comes into play?
Vice Chair, it's common for, especially in California, a lot of the legislature about housing does relate to just generally. I haven't looked into very much of this particular kind where they talk about a radius and whether or not they come back and take it away later. It's something we can look into, but I don't know if there's anything directly analogous to what we're seeing in this particular bill about having like a certain area and then having this extra part about new development based on its size. It's very strange.
Thank you, Jacob.
Absolutely.
Chair, I just have one question.
Absolutely.
Have we done any studies on how many historic neighborhoods are affected by this radius?
Commissioner Robinson. So there is a single historic district that is within the middle housing overlay that is on the national register, and that is the University Park neighborhood. Beyond that district, there is no other district designated. And I believe also there's no individually listed properties within the overlay, both on the local and the national register, mostly because a lot of those properties currently already have a multifamily zoning designation in the Maple Ash neighborhood. So it's only that one nationally designated district that falls within our middle housing overlay.
So I'm kind of curious as to whether or not, let's say there's a homeowner association that says that they want to restrict development in their neighborhood to a particular type of standard plan, say. Is that possible? I mean, are they allowed to do that?
For neighborhoods that have an established homeowners association, yes, they can do that through the regulation of their CCNRs. If they have an architectural review committee that approves those kind of things, they would have the judgment to be able to make those determinations. We as the city, as not being the arbiters of those CCNRs, wouldn't make any differentiation, but they would have the ability to do that only if they have an established CCNRs for their HOA. Likely, their CCNRs would prohibit multiple dwelling units on a property. That's not a very uncommon thing for covenants and property restrictions to say.
They are allowed, they will be allowed then to restrict development, on properties.
Correct, if they have established CCNRs.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner.
And full disclosure, I live in one of these areas and there's no homeowners association. Definitely not.
You're fair game.
Yeah, the area to the west of Roosevelt, basically, are houses that are all in the late 50s, early 60s built. And I'm just wondering, there was going to be a inventory of houses that age at some point. And is that still in the works? And what's the timeline of that?
So so kind of there was a post-World War II subdivision study done like 25 years ago that took it basically from 1945 to 1960. And so then we were looking to do kind of a post 1960 study, maybe, you know, taking it to 1975 or 1980. Yeah, that is in this. We did get approval to do that from council. It's just the issue is, do we have the funding at this point to complete it? And the answer is no. So we just, yeah, so that will probably just await, you know, additional funding, but I can't say when that will be, because I'll leave it there. We'll just have to see if and when we're able to kind of request additional supplemental funding from council. But it may be a little while. So unless we can secure some outside funding for such a thing.
And to follow up, this would not affect the ability to get your house. I mean, I don't think any of these, you know, would be designated historic, but it would not affect the ability to do that after this is passed, correct?
Correct. Yeah, you could still, yes. It doesn't affect the designation process. It's
Sure,
still,
just checking.
yeah, it still remains, it's still the property owners, up to the property owner whether they wish to designate their property individually or to include it as part of a district.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, hearing none, I have no comments or questions. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Payne, and the update. Yep, that's a mess. We'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is a mess. All right, chair and staff updates. Dr. Lechner, who goes first? Do I go first?
You can go first.
Oh, I
Chair.
have no updates. I just was,
Okay.
because this is my, yeah, it's my.
Well, chair,
yeah.
chair staff. So yeah, you are first on
Okay.
that. So yeah.
All right, well, I have no updates, so staff updates, please.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. I appreciate that. Yeah, the Walker House, which has been mentioned a couple of times during our discussion, located along 7th Avenue. It is being relocated tonight. Not as we speak, but later this evening, into the wee hours, perhaps. But anyway, it is being relocated to its new location over there, which is just west of the City Hall complex, or kind of technically kind of within the City Hall complex. So the new foundation's already been laid, and so you know that's a big move, an important move, and the city has been working with many city staff members, myself included, Mr. Lake, Mr. Tamulevich, many others have been working on, you know, making sure that goes off, hopefully without a hitch. So we'll see this evening, and you know, there's been a lot of, just want to let you know, there's been a lot of planning for that and a lot of attention paid to you know, making sure the house is boarded up, and you know, that attention to the historic materials of the house, and trying to, you know, limit any damage, or, you know, as much damage that may occur over the course of that short move. But we are excited to have that. So that will again be conveyed to the city. So that will become city property. It will be adaptively reused. So you know, there's been, you know, economic development is you know, has not announced, you know, who will be go in there yet. They don't have a client, but we feel pretty confident that will be an attractive location for a local business. And you know, as part of you know, putting that on, it's not just putting the building on its new foundation. You know, we're working to you know, get a historic architect involved, you know, to see what would need to be done to, you know, bring that house back to a kind of a rehabilitated state, because it's you know, it's in very good condition. We had Bob Graham, the historic architect, complete a study on behalf of the city, just kind of a short building condition assessment. And he was, I mean, he was impressed with kind of how good, the building looks after all these years. Now, I mean, there's certain things that are, particularly on the interior, they're going to have to be, perhaps replaced or some improvements made. But it seems to have pretty good bones. In other words, it's got original flooring. It's got a lot of original elements, particularly on the exterior. The original door, most of the original windows. Really the only major modification that was made to the exterior, and we don't know exactly when it happened, but it was sometime in the late 20th century, when it was being used as a rental for architects, including T.S. Montgomery. There was a wall removed between the bedrooms, the two bedrooms in the house. But that's really kind of the only change to the floor plan. So we have high hopes for what that can be used for, and getting that back to a condition in line with the Secretary of the Interior standards. Wanted to mention too, the Tempe Women's Club had their first meeting back in the clubhouse, and that is on Mill Avenue, and that is that's a historic building. It's listed in the national and the local registers, and the Tempe Women's Club, as you may have followed in the news, had a legal battle to reacquire, to regain ownership of that building, and they were successful in that, and they had been meeting kind of previously outside of the building, but now last, I believe, Wednesday, they had their first meeting actually back in the building. So it was good. They invited me to speak at that meeting, and it was actually the first time I'd actually been able to be in the building, and it still looks pretty good. So was pleased to see that. I want to mention to you too, because you may have noticed on my email signature, it no longer lists me as senior planner, and that's because as part of a reclassification and a compensation classification study, the city of Tempe went through kind of each of its positions and reevaluated them to determine if certain adjustments needed to be made. And one of those adjustments had to do with my position, which was to remove the senior planner designation, and to for the first time kind of officially list the position as historic preservation officer. I'm still in the planning division. I'm still kind of doing the same functions, performing the same functions that I was before, but it's a good thing. I think it's a more accurate descriptor for the position, and just speaks to the fact that the position, my position, is quite different than what the planners, and particularly senior planners, are doing in their daily roles. One last thing I'd mention is we are one member short with Chair Whitson's resignation. So we will are planning to nominate a new member at the September 18th regular council meeting. And if approved by council, their first meeting would be in October. I'll just refrain from mentioning who that person is until they're approved, presumably. But just want to let you know we'll be back at full strength at the next meeting. And then one other thing I wanted to do is something that I'd like to start doing at the end of each meeting, and that's just to ask you if you have any items that you would like to have placed on the agenda for the next meeting. And putting you on the spot, but if certainly you should feel free to contact me if you have questions. I will work always with the chair to check with her to see what items she may want to bring and put on the agenda. But I also want to open that up to other commission members as well. So if you have any items for me, feel free to let me know. And otherwise, you can always contact me with those requests. and we'll do our best to put them on the agenda. So any items for now?
Right now, Vice Chair
Yeah.
Fackler.
I don't have an item,
Okay.
but I was wondering, now that we have the bond money, is that tied into the CIP?
Mm-hmm.
So in order for you to request funding for a particular historic property or in support of a historic property, it has to go through the CIP process and you need to initiate that?
Yeah, so it has to, the funding has to be, tied to a specific CIP project. So the request would have to be in line with that CIP project as well. Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Robinson, did you have an agenda item?
No.
Okay.
Nothing right now.
Anyone else? Got then?
Okay.
Okay, I do have a question for you, Dr. Lechner. Since this building is being moved onto the parcel that you said it's within the boundary, so what happens now, since it's within the boundary? Are we reviewing alterations that are happening to it? What's the process with that? Because I know it's just historic eligible right now, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we'll review it. I mean, it's my intent would be to, and if we need to, what we can talk in planning about if there needs to be some kind of like parcel adjustment or something. But what I gather is that, yeah, it would be technically within that boundary. However, my intention would be, now that it's city property, would be to, at some point soon, before too long, to, well, I should say soon, kind of after the process of it, kind of being rehabilitated is completed at some point, would be to initiate a designation or a nomination to designate in the local register, to have that kind of officially, to kind of have that historic overlay. So, but anyway, I will tell you, kind of the rehabilitation plan, I mean, that'll certainly be something that we'll want you all to, review and get your input on. So we're not going to, prevent you, keep you out of that process for sure. But it's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you. I was curious.
Yeah.
All right, if there's no other updates, I can.
No, that's all. Those are the only ones.
All right, I'll adjourn the meeting. It's 8:06, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have